a NoMoreStinkyMonkeys.com production. Everybody must drink Fred. This is a long one because that is the kind of cultural influence this band had, and their story is just so fascinating to me. You could say it was the ultimate rock and roll story. 1976 was a crossroads in pop music history. Rock and roll was once written and recorded for dancing, but had moved further and further away from that, as first the Beatles started experimenting with the form, and then other bands followed suit. There were the blues-based bands like Cream that viewed the music seriously and with purity, and then there were progressive bands like Yes and Pink Floyd that also viewed it seriously, but more like art. And as they went in these different directions, a lot of the fun was removed as well. So people who still wanted to just dance and have a good time turned to disco and pop, as rock and roll started to die a little. But then there were the other people who didn't like the serious artistic tone that rock and roll had taken on, but were also completely turned off by the artificiality of disco. These people needed a new outlet, a new way to express how they felt, and what they often felt was anger. Anger towards the economy and their future prospects, anger towards the hippie generation that seemed to easily abandon their 60s ideals. This sentiment was especially strong in economically depressed England. Trash and filth on the streets, high unemployment, and a school system that discouraged the youth from believing that they could escape the wrong side of the tracks. Out of this perfect storm arose number 150, the Sex Pistols. In 1972, three working-class teenagers formed a band in London called The Strand. They played on stolen instruments they got at the end of concerts that they went to. The Strand members, Steve Jones, Paul Cook, and Wally Nightingale, would hang out in a rock and roll clothing store called Too Fast to Live, Too Young to Die. It was owned by Malcolm McLaren and Vivian Westwood. McLaren unofficially managed the Strand, and then in 1975 he left for New York City. While there, he managed to promote the New York Dolls and began to be inspired by the growing punk rock scene in Lower Manhattan. He was particularly impressed by the style and attitude of Richard Hell from the band Television. The Strand had been rehearsing a lot, and when they came back to London, they performed their first show. They fired Nightingale, and Jones, the singer, moved to guitar, and then they found a new singer in John Lydon. He was hanging around wearing a Pink Floyd t-shirt with I Hate written in handwriting above the name. Jones renamed him Johnny Rotten because of his bad teeth. They changed their name to QT Jones and the Sex Pistols before finally settling on just the Sex Pistols. 76 became a huge year in the growth of the band and the punk rock movement across England. Among their core group of fans, known as the Bromley Contingent, were future stars Susie Sue from the Susie and the Banshees and Billy Idol. They began to dress like the Pistols even, ragged, dirty clothes, often held together by safety pins. McLaren and Westwood saw the growing punk movement as more than just a chance to dress differently, but were very interested in the radical uprising in Paris in 1968 and the anarchist ideology that it stemmed from. They wanted to promote these ideals in the music, and they thought that Johnny Rotten, with his green hair and raggedy look, was the perfect vehicle to do this. The shows became not about the music, but chaos, with band members sitting with the audience and throwing chairs around. Howard Devoto of the Buzzcocks said, "My life changed the moment I saw the Sex Pistols." The Clash's Joe Strummer saw them in a pub he sang in regularly and recognized punk rock as the future. In April, the Americans' leading punk band, the Ramones, released their first album, and while it is considered a seminal moment in the growth of punk rock in England, Johnny Rotten said that it held no particular interest to him. In July, the Sex Pistols played a show, and they had two opening acts, The Damned and The Clash. In October, they signed a contract with EMI Records, and in November released their first single, Anarchy in the UK, which mixed McLaren's ideas with Johnny Rotten's angry lyrics, like I am an Antichrist and destroy. They used cutout letters in their posters to resemble ransom notes. John Robb, a music journalist, described the record's impact. From Steve Jones' opening salvo of descending chords to Johnny Rotten's fantastic sneering vocals, this song is the perfect statement. A stunningly powerful piece of punk politics, a lifestyle choice, a manifesto that heralds a new era. They were interviewed on a London news show and cursed so much that they became notorious sensations almost overnight. They went on a tour, and out of 20 concerts, only 7 took place because of fear of problems or local people organizing against them. In fact, one council member came out and said, "The worst of the punk rock groups, I suppose, currently are the Sex Pistols. They are unbelievably nauseating. They are the antithesis of humankind," and he wished them sudden death. The common thinking at the time was that punk rock bands couldn't play their instruments, but the Pistols not only could play, but developed into quite a tight and ferocious band that experimented with distortion and feedback and pushed their equipment to its limits. In early 1977, the band released its second single, "God Save the Queen," which was an anti-royalty song, but bassist Glenn Matlock hated it for being fascist, and his growing disenchantment with the band forced him to leave. In walked John Simon Ritchie, the ultimate Sex Pistols fan, now known as Sid Vicious. He was hired for his look, not knowing how to play bass. Interestingly, when McLaren was looking for a singer when the band was starting out, his partner, Vivian Westwood, told him about John Ritchie, but he hired the wrong John. But by 1977, manager McLaren was less interested in anything but the sensationalism and the scandal that the band caused. And Sid was childlike at first, but he loved the spotlight, and he fed off of it. And once he met a Long Islander named Nancy Spungen, everything changed. She was a drug addict who got him hooked on heroin, and as his life spiraled out of control, he became more distant from the band and his good friend Johnny Rotten. On March 10th, A&M Records signed them to a contract. After only 6 days of incredible mayhem, A&M broke the contract, setting a new land speed record for career destruction. God Save the Queen reached number 2 on the British charts, the same week as the Queen's 25th anniversary, but the fury caused by the lyrics put the Sex Pistols at risk. From the BBC, from censors, from the cops, and from ordinary citizens who just sided with the Queen. They got into fistfights and really got hurt. Still, the band secretly recorded their first album, Nevermind the Bullocks, and managed to do almost all of it without Sid's awful bass playing. He was sick much of the time with hepatitis, so that kind of worked out to the band's favor. The album went to number 1 in England. When they debuted in America in early 1978, many northern states refused to grant them visas because they had criminal records. So McLaren booked them in the Deep South to potentially cause a ruckus, and boy, did it ever. Sid Vicious was way out of control, either high on heroin or suffering from its withdrawal, and would start fights off and on stage. By January 17th, the band was officially broken up. They only came to America at the beginning of January, but they released one last single with Sid singing My Way on the B-side. Johnny Rotten formed a new band called Public Image Limited, and he had a top 10 hit right away. Sid went solo on October 12th of 78, stabbed his girlfriend to death, maybe by accident, in the Chelsea hotel. After he served 55 days going cold turkey in Rikers Island for smashing a beer mug in Patti Smith's brother's face, Sid celebrated his release by getting high again on heroin and suffering from an overdose. He died. That was February 2nd, 1979. Sid Vicious was only 21 years old. Too fast to live, too young to die. I guess he did it his way. From the Freditor.